So hi, everyone. My name is John Gershman. I teach here at the Wagner School, the Robert F. Wagner Graduate School for Public Service, the Office of International Programs, and we're delighted to welcome you for this edition of the Conflict, Security, and Development series. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to thank the various co-sponsors. In addition to the Office of International Programs at Wagner, the Center for Global Affairs at the School of Professional Studies, the Master's in International Relations program at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, the International Education program at the Steinhardt School, the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice, and the Bernstein Institute for Human Rights, both at NYU Law School. This afternoon, we are going to hear from Dr. Mehari Maru, who is currently the academic coordinator of the Young African Leaders Program and part-time professor at the School of Transnational Governance and at the Migration Policy Center at the European University Institute in Florence, as well as an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Italy. Over 2 decades of management and professional working experience in multilateral organizations, think tanks, and universities. Dr. Mehari was previously a member of the technical committee of the Tana High-Level Security Forum and worked as a program coordinator for the AU Migration Program, as well as a legal expert at the African Union Commission. He served as chief strategist, legal drafter, and lead migration expert in the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and as program head for conflict prevention and risk analysis at the Institute for Security Studies, and as director for university reform at Addis Ababa University. He is going to speak to us today on shifting sands, the anatomy of geopolitical conflicts in the Horn of Africa. As is our customary practice, as we go along, if people have questions, please throw them up into the Q&A. And after Dr. Maru's presentation, we'll have an ongoing Q&A session with him. So without further ado, Dr. Maru, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, John, and Anna, and also for the Spring 2024 Conflict Series organizers and sponsors. I'm very, very happy to join you today, and I will speak using PowerPoint. Let me share some slides that I have. My main focus, like John has indicated, will be to look at geopolitics and played in the Horn of Africa, leading to wars and atrocities, and how this may have a far-reaching consequences, not only for the countries and the population in the Horn of Africa, but beyond that to the regional, continental, and international order. And I will highlight why I think this is very important. Some talking points. First of all, just to characterize, to put some of the talking points that I will cover. First, there is no question there has been always geopolitical competition, but this time, as it was witnessed before historically, this is characterized by a race to the bottom, if you wish, and without a proper standard, without a minimum ground rules, and most international law, international institutions like the UN and regional and continental organizational frameworks are ignored. So I'll talk a little bit on the geopolitical competition and race to the bottom. And also I will highlight a tale of two agreements sponsored by geopolitical powers with the support of international and continental institutions, but where they cancel each other. I will bring in relation to the Tigray war on Tigray, that in Ethiopia, and also the war in Sudan, particularly the atrocities in Darfur and elsewhere. And also these are a case to showcase. Otherwise, there are a lot of conflicts in Africa, particularly in DRC, in addition to the war in Sudan, in Ethiopia, various parts of Ethiopia, in Amhara now, intense fighting in Amhara region of Ethiopia, and with reported atrocities that may amount to crimes, war crimes, and also in Oromia, where you had long-standing conflict in Oromia, where atrocities has been reported. Now, I will also talk that the preventive and interventionist peace and security architectures, normative frameworks, institutional frameworks, collaborative frameworks that were established 3 decades ago after the Rwandese genocide and the lessons from the Rwandese genocide and the failure of the international community to prevent Rwanda and the genocide against Tutsis. There were lessons learned, and almost everyone committed to the never again commitment. But we have, and there were post-Rwanda genocide, there was an effort to build these architectures, interventionist architectures, early warning systems, preventive architectures by the UN, by the African Union, even IGAD mediation efforts that were very robust, active, fast. Now we can see clearly through these 2 cases, but also other cases in general, that these have failed after 3 decades of investment, huge investment on these architectures. They are unable and unwilling in some cases to prevent genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and atrocities, even to prevent war and move towards positive peace. Now, I'll talk a little bit on that too. And the fundamental question that should lead to some kind of answer is, are these frameworks and architectures still fit for their foundational purpose, the purpose that they were established? If they are not, why are they not working, and how could they be fixed? If they are not, how do we and how should the international community, if there is such community, revamp, reboot, rearrange these architectures? And I will say some may not be bold, but they should be considered as bold proposals, because the time we are in my opinion, requires bold proposals to change this situation. The main points I will be discussing here are, again, one of the conclusions I want to point out is that these peace and security architectures that were established by the international community in general, by the UN Security Council and its UN system in general, the African Union, especially the peace and security architecture, the African governance architecture, and Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, which had similar interventionist arrangements, especially in mediation, a very robust, fast reaction, that they have failed actually to prevent genocidal war in Ethiopia, on Tigray, and also they have failed to prevent the same in Sudan. And actually, I argue here that these architectures, these institutions have been misused as part of the war. They have been misused by states and powerful entities they have been misused by member states and powers for their wars in these 2 cases, for example. And it also shows that these architectures, this never again commitment that came post-Rwanda genocide has failed. This commitment has never been acted upon effectively. There was in the beginning efforts in different parts of the world. And I'll talk a little bit on the background why the AU Constitutive Act, and the regional economic communities, even the UN responsibility to protect was meant to serve, but how it was abused and then led to the total failure that we see now, genocide being committed in different parts of the world. Partially, I will argue that this is due to the geopolitical competition without basic minimum regard and respect to international law, international system, that the multilateral, rule-based multilateralism that the post-Second World War wanted to establish. And these were disregarded for the sake of national interest, personal power play, power politics, resource politics, and mainly also identity politics. That is the undercurrent in many countries and their failure to act in a common agenda for as much a common agenda like prevention of genocide, which is the most worst, the worst case of atrocity crimes of the three crimes that we have in international law. Now, here I would like to, for some reason it has stopped the PowerPoint. Let me check. I hope now it is on. Yeah.
All good.
Yeah, all good. Okay. So the great and middle power competition, which I was talking in the previous slide, the last one, that partially the reason why we have this failed peace and security architectures at global and continental and even sub-regional level in the Horn of Africa is partly the geopolitical power competition that we have without any minimum standard that should be respected. And there is no way this institution's multilateral organization has been undermined. There is no way they can tame the states and the powers that we are talking about. And the Africa has been always a battleground for great and middle power competition. We know the literature in the Cold War and previously under colonialism and slavery and other great powers and regional powers, middle powers has been at play, in most cases having proxy war during the Cold War. There were a time with the end of the Cold War until the 9/11 attack that Africa were more or less left to fend for itself, that it led the withdrawal of global interests from Africa, at least for a short time, in the way of manifesting their power and competition through war and hard power. But in the time between the end of the Cold War and the formation of the, for example, African Union was informed partly because Africa was also allowed to develop its own policy and institutions. Remember the 1994 Rwanda's genocide, which has led to a global reflection on these architectures, the need to responsibly protect, the need for responsibility to protect, and sovereignty as a responsibility as part of the other coin of responsibility to protect, being considered the sovereignty as a responsibility that countries cannot do whatever they want to their population, that when indeed they fail to treat their sovereignty, to take their sovereignty as responsibility to their population, then they forfeit their right to reject any intervention from outside. So there was interventionist mandate that was emerging, and on the African side also, Africa has it had its own reflection. This was after the end of apartheid and the new democratic South Africa, and the discussion for including insert and in 1999 where there was a talk of forming and transforming the OAU and forming the African Union. The need for more robust interventionist and integrationist organization with different mission than the kind of mission that we had with the Organization of African Unity, which was successful more on the anti-colonial and anti-apartheid struggle. And a new mandate was given to the AU through the AU Constitutive Act, which led to, like I said, more interventionist and integrationist mandate that it was given through the especially Article 4 of the Constitutive Act. But architectures were built based on the AU Constitutive Act and the AU Peace and Security Architecture Protocol. And this protocol provides an architecture, institutional framework, collaborative framework, even financial framework facilities to implement this. And this has been on the work, and we have seen some intervention from Africa, bold interventions, especially in Darfur, through AMIS in the beginning, and then which grew to UNAMID, and in Somalia, where the international community was not able directly to intervene for various reasons. You have the Somalia syndrome, and also where IGAD in the beginning led the initiative. It started as IGASOM in terms of concept, but it developed into AMISOM, where frontline countries were not allowed in the beginning actually to intervene, replacing the Ethiopia's invasion of Somalia. And there were robust attempts to intervene in various other parts of Africa, but it dwindled fast with the lack of commitment from Africa side. There were many initiatives based on this interventionist mandate of the AU. There was ACRIC, the rapid deployment or response mechanism that was conceptualized, which never took off. The African standby force was part of this interventionist mandate. The African standby force, as we speak, is not really standing or moving. The talk of that, effectively, we have seen it in the Sahel belt, where there were a talk by ECOWAS, but was not followed by credible move on the ground. So the fizzling of this interventionist mandate is clear, and it shows that I'll come back to this case when I talk about the war on Tigray, and also the war that is ongoing now in Sudan, where the UN Security Council, the African Union, and IGAD are in paralysis, actually. Now, this has to do with, first, with the great powers competition. And I want to take, because I'm going to talk about this war in Sudan and on Tigray, I want to take you to the time where the signs of this war started to emerge. This is during Trump's administration, where you had the US policy towards a great power competition was formulated. And it's very clear that with this kind of policy, it was a sign that we have moved to post-war on terror strategic policy to a new one, great power competition, probably on the issue of containing China and Russia's expansions in different parts of the world, but also in Africa, where China and Russia were accused of supporting authoritarian model of governance, especially China with its large economic partnership with Africa, including in the Horn of Africa. The same could be said also of this great power competition policy from the US with the 2018 US National Defense Strategy. Remember, the change in Sudan happened almost 2018, also in Ethiopia around that time, where you had continuous many years of protest, popular protests that led to change of government in both Ethiopia and in Sudan. And this was clearly also pointed out as the national policy on the great power competition between the US, the Western world, and China, and to an extent also on Russia. And it shows that it says here, another change to the strategic environment is a resilient, this is my own emphasis, resilient but weakening post-Second World War international order. That this is indeed a new emerging threat to the international order that was established under the UN Charter and the formation of the UN. And this also is considered through this policy, this National Defense Strategy of 2018, as the rule of the road instead of rule-based multilateral arrangement. Now, of course, this is in 2018. There is a new administration. There is a new strategy, US strategy by Biden for Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, actually. And that this moves, the narrative is completely different from this. But for the case that I'm talking, the war on Tigray, the war in Sudan started during this time. And they have clear link with this general great power competition and how the paralysis of multilateral organizations came into being. And when there is a change of administration, how some of these international mechanisms were trying to move towards limiting the damage from this war. But still, these general assumptions on the great power competition and actually core assumptions are still at play. This is not limited to the US. The EU, as a coming together of several member states, very powerful countries, very strong relations to Africa, the Horn of Africa, very related in terms of proximity, trade, and other aspects, have affected them. And actually, there was a pronouncement by the president of the EU Commission that there is a need for geopolitical commission. In 2018, actually, the EU Council came up with a policy on the Red Sea that the Red Sea is the most important shore for geopolitical competition, the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, that there is a need for more engagement and that the security of the maritime domain in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, Bab el-Mandeb, is critical for from the geopolitical consideration. And the same could be said about China's expansion and the competition around between great powers. And the issue of Russia, especially the Sahel countries, but also its role through Wagner and now the Expeditionary Corps is an important aspect of this great power competition. But this is not limited also to great power competition. It's also middle power competition at play. Actually, with the Trump administration, one thing that emerged is middle power states were allowed to play a role that is actually undermining the international order. Still undermines, at that time, undermined a lot. Yemen is an example where the Obama's policy of leading from behind allowed Saudi Arabia and UAE to destroy Yemen. And this war has led to a lot of atrocities, atrocities and deaths from famine, from war, but also the integrity of the Yemeni state is over, if you wish, in many ways. Now Yemen is divided. The different parts of Yemen, especially southern part of Yemen, has a new trajectory of development and is more or less under complete influence of UAE. And with this great power competition, and especially Trump's administration and its support to Gulf countries, has seen a rise of UAE. UAE for a long time, before the Trump's administration, And the last years of Obama was a junior partner of Saudi Arabia. It was unthinkable that UAE will lead Saudi Arabia, but with the days of the king in Saudi Arabia and the rise of bin Salman as the prince, the head of Saudi government, UAE was not anymore a junior partner. Actually, it was treating Saudi Arabia as a junior partner. And recently, you have an attempt by Saudi leadership to reclaim the leadership of Gulf countries, which UAE is resisting, and you have a clash between UAE and Saudi Arabia. And I'll come back how it affects the region. Remember, the Middle East is, in terms of security, trade, migration, religious aspects, the same as the Horn of Africa. It's the same zone of influence, the same in many ways. So you have UAE, Saudi Arabia, and now Turkey, more important, more powerful, asserting their power in the Horn of Africa and the rest of Africa, if you wish. And it expands from a military cooperation, economic cooperation, to even on owning and leasing land for carbon trading. And they have announced this, and they are buying large chunk of land in different parts of Africa. Now, and this is also untraditional, like UAE rise to power and leading the GCC in general. And remember the rift between the GCC countries that led to blockade of Qatar, which came with the background of Trump's administration's policy. Then you had new also, where Egypt and others were the main actors, powerful actors in the Middle East, and the external actors in the Horn of Africa, now being replaced by UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. They were playing role before, but the role now is more pronounced. They are in the leadership rather than being led by others. And you have proxy wars and alliances emerging, and we'll talk about that later on. And Turkey, I want to emphasize here, is expanding its military, especially drone power, which is playing a critical role in wars, especially in the war on Tigray. It was the most important element, both from UAE and Turkey. The drones played a vital role in changing the dynamics. The same has happened in different places, Azerbaijan, Armenia war, in Libya, how drones were new technologies, which are function of economic power also, but also military vision, played a big role in this regard. And Turkey is not limited to this drone power or military cooperation. Economic, it has been almost playing a big role. Partnership, it's one of the biggest trading partner in the Horn of Africa, and it has humanitarian role, especially in Somalia, that it played a very big role. And in some quarters, politically, domestically, they see Turkish model of democratic political Islam doctrine. The recent Turkey-Somali Defense Pact in relation Somalia seeking support from external actors to what it considers as an attack on its sovereignty through the Memorandum of Understanding with Somaliland and Ethiopia, and the Somaliland's Memorandum of Understanding is an issue here. And I will come back to this also later if time permits. Let me take you to the two tails of peace deal, two agreements that we had. In 2018, with the new government in Ethiopia, there was the Jeddah Act, the Jeddah Peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea was signed. And this was sponsored by the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, with the support of EU and others. And the peace agreement was signed. There was short-lived peace agreement, which now you will see is not anymore there. That this Jeddah Pact was ostensibly the one which led the Nobel Committee to award peace prize, even if there were warnings that this is not a pact for peace. It was a pact for war, to sandwich Tigray and to destroy TPLF. This led to war basically in Tigray also, where Tigray felt like it's being sandwiched from many parts. And this war was, this war came into after 2 years of this peace agreement. Now, in 2021, after almost 1 year and 1 year of the war on Tigray, which I'll come back if time permits later on, the Pretoria deal was signed. The Pretoria deal is an agreement between Addis Ababa and Ethiopian government and the Tigray government. TPLF is the signatory, but generally speaking, to deal with the war between Ethiopia and Tigray. And this may lead to another war with Eritrea. Ethiopia now is at loggerheads and is in propaganda war with Eritrea. And it's in war, Ethiopia is in war with the Amhara forces that were part of the war against, they were part of the alliance on the war on Tigray. And these two pacts actually cancel each other, basically. There was the first one, it started as a peace agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Now we have another peace agreement that may lead to war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. But there is tension clearly that emerged from this. And this war partly sponsored by US government, both of them, and different administrations. Now, the war on Tigray, let me go to a little bit in detail here. There were actors, of course, the Ethiopian National Defense Force with the Ethiopian federal government, Eritrean Defense Force with the Eritrean government, and the Amhara Special Forces, including other entities of the regional government of Amhara, but also other regional forces from Ethiopia were marshaled to this war on the 4th of November 2020. And these were supported by UAE, Turkey, and some officials of the Trump administration, which officially supported. And there are studies clearly showing that this war was to an extent supported by officials, at least by officials of the Trump administration. And on the other hand, you have what is popularly known Tigray Defense Force. It's a popular resistance in Tigray, where you have youngsters joining to as part of the resistance. And on this Tigray war has led to staggering deaths of varied estimates, about 600,000 minimum. And this is in 2020 to 2022. And if you go to Uppsala data, it will show you that only in 2021, there was more than 100,000 deaths, the deadliest of all, including Ukraine. The number of fatalities, according to Uppsala data, fatalities in the war is staggering, ranging between 50,000 to 500,000. And the reason why we have this big gap between estimate is no investigation was allowed, no media was allowed to access, and you have a blackout and siege that were imposed on Tigray for more than 1 year and so on. 1 year and so. Tigray war, according to Uppsala, makes it in 2022 the deadliest since the Rwanda genocide in 1994. Over 5 million were put under siege and deliberately starved as weapons of war, and tens of thousands were sexually assaulted, millions were displaced. Now, if you want to look how the Trump administration, for example, knew about the Tigray war and how ethnic cleansing was coming, you have many research that show to that effect. And actually, the Department of State drafted a declaration in 2021 that the Ethiopian government atrocity in Tigray constituted a genocide, according to 3 US officials. This is foreign policy reporting on officials officials who they have spoken to. And so basically the US government was almost to declare that this was a genocide. Now, the International Commission, the UN has established, it had established International Commission on Human Rights experts on Ethiopia, and that it has concluded war crime was committed from all sides, not necessarily only on Tigray. Of course, the comparison pales, the number is significant atrocities were committed in Tigray, but there were also crimes committed by Tigrayan forces. War crimes and crime against humanity were committed in this. But it didn't have time and access to investigate whether genocide was committed. But it indicated in its report, the first report, that indeed there were intent to render victims of rape, for example, infertile, and used dehumanizing language that suggested an intent to destroy the Tigrayan ethnicity. And also the same with the other two, beyond mere intent to kill, instead reflect desire to destroy. Now, this has been also reflected, but the fate of the commission actually was the commission, the International Commission on Human Rights, the ICRI, International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, was terminated last September, I think, if I'm not mistaken. That the US, European Union, and others have supported that. Let me stop here. I think I am over my time. So let me go to, without dealing with Sudan here, which I would have loved to do that, but let me show you some of the elements in Sudan. There are 2 warring parties, main ones, but there is a third one too, from different parts of especially southern Sudan. SAF, the Sudanese armed forces, more or less is supported by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Eritrea, and Iran now, especially with drone. It's a transfer of drones technology, and also RSF, which is the Rapid Special Forces, which is known, and there are official reports even submitted to the UN system by UAE, Ethiopia, Libya, the Libyan National Army led by Haftar, General Haftar, Chad, Wagner Group, and also Turkey and Russia transact with almost both, which may change soon. Now, the main point that I want to raise here is that why, in the presence of this all, the international rule-based multilateralism that we had under UN Charter, with all its problem, was unable to intervene and first prevent, and secondly intervene when the intervention was necessary. And secondly, the AU actually, and its APSA, the architectures, the African Peace and Security Architecture, which is clear in the case of genocide, war crime, and crimes against humanity, that the intervention that has to be made to be carried out are very clear in this. And it was unable to actually have a proper meeting and a proper effort for almost a year. So currently also we see the Ethiopia-Somaliland Memorandum of Understanding, which is geopolitically becoming concerning, that it is the UN is unable to deal with it. It has referred it to the African Union. The African Union has referred it in the latest summit to IGAD, and IGAD is in its own predicament that Sudan has withdrawn, Eritrea refused to join, and is this abdication of responsibility by UN and AU. I'll stop here, and maybe during discussion, if I have time, I will bring some of the bold proposals I would like to suggest. Thank you.